Hello and welcome, my name is Peter, and this video is being made in response to it being a requirement of a technical development teacher's coursework that they observe a coach training their competitive squad. Now, I don't know why that is, but here are a couple of guesses. This could be so that you can see where some of your swimmers are going to progress to, and secondly, you'll get some idea what additional skills a coach has or should have. So you'll see what is happening, which will look somewhat different from what your lessons look like, and the coach might be able to explain to you why these are being done. Now, I can't claim that this is going to be comprehensive. Most of this, some of it's quite detailed, but most of this is basically for your awareness. Now, being me, I'm underprepared as usual. This is the coaching manual that we got, and I did the course in 1999. The level 1 course, now called bronze level. I'll be working from that. When I decided to do this, I thought I'd better be prepared and read my way through this manual again. But me being me, as usual, I've got about halfway and decided I'm running out of time. It's something like the frog that keeps jumping half the remaining distance to the pond. I was never going to get there, so not going to be complete. I say again, it's largely for your awareness. Right at the front of the manual, in the introduction, 4 key concepts of coaching are described. It only takes a couple of pages and it's easily overlooked, but these are the things that should be kept in mind, and everything in the rest of the manual relates to one or more of these key concepts. And they are, the first 2 I see as having to do with conditioning, and those are progressive overload and adaptation. I'll just expand on that a little more here. In training, you're given work to do that stretches your limits a little bit, and in the periods between training sessions is when you rest and recover, and that is when the adaptation occurs, which allows you to do a bit more again in the next training session. That's the theory. Those 2 are all about conditioning. Next 2 I see as being broadly preparation for competition. This one is labelled specificity, and this one is given the term periodisation. And I'm starting to get hazy about these, but I'll try to explain them. When it comes to preparation for competition, you'll do a lot of other things other than practicing your race. That's been superseded. That's not the only thing to do. If that's all you do, you'll find out that there are other people who can do better than that. And specificity refers to all the other things that you do that prepare you for that race. And I'll go into that later, if I can remember. And up here, periodisation. That's all your big long-term, everything from long-term goals down to the way you plan one training session. If you remember nothing else from this, if anyone asks you what the things are that a coach can do that a technique development teacher normally does not, that's them. They understand and can apply conditioning, and they can prepare swimmers for competition. That's it. That should get you out of it if someone asks you an awkward question. So here's the coaching manual. Contents pages. Introduction, and this is what I was talking about before, about these key concepts. over here. Now, adaptation, progressive overload, specificity, periodisation. And then there's a chapter on biomechanics, basically the engineering behind propulsion. And then there are details about how the strokes are done, along with their starts and turns. This is pages 15 to 47. For a technique development teacher, that's all fairly familiar ground, as well as you would have information about drills, which we find a bit later in the book over here. Back here. Now, you see that in a coaching course, they cover the whole thing in one day. So you've got a day of theory and then a day of practical. So they get through this book, or the contents of this book, in about 8 hours. That's a lot to take in. So by the time you get up to here, it's about morning tea time. Most people are still hanging on by then. But now we come to this mysterious physiology of swimming. Physiology. This is basically what's going on in the body to supply the energy that provides the propulsion. And over here, I'll just skip ahead. You see, physiological preparation is, in other words, is conditioning. It's conditioning the physiology of the energy supply. And just skipping ahead here, in here, I've just added that muscle composition is mentioned in there, and I'll show you this a little bit later. The thing is that if you don't understand about muscle composition, you won't understand about swimmers' different aptitudes. I'll expand on that a bit later. And then if you don't understand the physiology, then you won't understand what's going on during a race, and you won't understand a lot about how to condition the physiology of the energy systems. You'll be able to work from recipes, but if you don't understand it, you won't be able to fine-tune it. Let's go over here. Now, I think I'll go and stand outside and wave my arms around a bit again. Yes, I'll do that, but muscle composition, yeah, I'll stand outside and wave my arms around for that too. So here we go. I will try to explain about muscle composition. It only takes up about 1 page in the manual, and it's buried in amongst the rest of the physiology. But if it's not known about, or if it's overlooked, it can have detrimental effects for many swimmers. Now, at its very simplest, muscle is composed of 2 types of fibres. White, fast twitch fibre, and red, slow twitch fibre. And we all have a combination of those, and for most of us, we're general purpose athletes, and it's fairly balanced. The majority of people would have muscle fibre compositions in the range of 60% red to 40% white to 60% white to 40% red. And it follows a normal distribution very approximately, so that the bulk of people are contained within that range. By far the vast majority, say 80, maybe even over more than 90%. The other few percent out on the ends are predominantly white fibre or predominantly red fibre, and these are your dedicated sprinters and your dedicated endurance athletes. Now, you could walk into any sporting club in the world that has 100 members, say, just for the sake of argument. Not the ones that are selected, like for all marathon runners or all weightlifters, that would have a very skewed distribution. But for any club like an athletics club, if you were to look at the track runners, a club where we compete in swimming pools over ranges of distances, or say velodrome cyclists, again over a range of distances. If you've got 100 members, most of them are going to be in the middle, and probability would predict that you would have 3 dedicated sprinters, and at the other end 3 dedicated endurance athletes. That's how many there are. You have to be able to identify them, and you have to be able to train them to develop that aptitude. The point is that you can't change this composition, no matter how much you train. Training can improve your performance at one end or the other, but you cannot change that muscle distribution because it is genetically determined. You're born with that. People who race horses know about this. They know that sprinters are bred, they're not trained. Likewise, your stayers are bred, they're not trained. You can't change it. So if you're a general purpose athlete and you do lots and lots of sprint training, you'll get better at sprints. But if you get into a competition with one of these who are all white fibre, you're not going to get a gold medal. The way this works in swimming is that just suppose you line up a race full of competitive swimmers and you've got, I don't know, let's say you've got a 10-lane pool and you put 3 sprinters there and 4 general purpose athletes and 3 distance swimmers. If you swim them over 50 metres, which is short distance, you can expect the sprinters to win. If you swim them over 200, you'd expect the endurance athletes to come out in front. The 100-metre event is the balance point. This is where you would expect the sprinters to be ahead. If they go flat out from the start, the sprinters would be ahead at the 50-metre turn. But by the time you get back to the 100, the sprinters can't stay in front. Everyone else has caught them. And the endurance athletes have not gone far enough to get ahead. All else being equal, you would expect all those to come in about level at the 100-metre mark. So this has a few implications. I'll get to, yes, I'll have to be talking about physiology before I talk more about distances. Just another little bit of trivia, if you're familiar with other sports. I gather that 100 metres of swimming is about equivalent to 400 metres on the track or 700 metres on the velodrome. Those are the balance points where all your athletes can be expected to come in about level. Now, nearly everyone does some other sport during the off-season, and a lot of these are the popular ball sports. They only require you to, usually all they require you to do is you get the ball, you go for a little sprint, you pass the ball, and then you jog around recovering and following play. You're never required to go beyond your sprint range. You know, if you're on a 100-metre long field remember what I said before, a sprinter on the track can sprint, I think your sprint range would go, well, it goes in excess of 200 metres. Maybe close up to 3 if you're a really fit sprinter. So if you have to run the length of the field, you're still within your sprint range. What they don't understand is you come into swimming for the summer season, most of the events are not sprints. It takes a super fit adult to sprint 50 metres, and I'll explain about that in the physiology. For your 9, 10, 11-year-olds, 50 metres is short distance, but it is not a sprint. I'll explain about that in physiology. So to get to the conclusion of this about muscle composition, if the coach doesn't identify the swimmers properly according to their aptitude and doesn't train them appropriately for it, this can have detrimental effects on the swimmers. Like I said, you cannot take a general purpose athlete and turn them into a sprinter. You cannot take a general purpose athlete or a sprinter and turn them into an endurance athlete. Can't be done. So what we end up with is a whole lot of swimmers whose aptitude has never been identified properly. Consequently, the people who are training the squads are trying to figuratively ram square pegs into round holes. And that's why a whole lot of swimmers would finish their swimming career believing that they were never much good at swimming. It's a shame. They could have been better at it if their aptitude had been identified. So, how to determine these all-important muscle compositions? Well, I would be aware of 4 different ways. And from the most accurate to the least, I'd rate them something like this. The most accurate would be to take a muscle biopsy, a tiny sample of muscle tissue, and examine it under a microscope and count the number of white fibres and the number of red fibres. Find out that ratio, and that's probably the most accurate. But that's pretty invasive and not everyone has access to that. This is for your elite athletes who would be at the Australian Institute of Sport or something like that. Second one down is quick and easy and fairly reliable, and that is to do a jump test. Now, most people who are in their prime and who are fairly fit and healthy can jump approximately as high as their own knees, straight up. If you can jump considerably higher than that, that's an indication of a sprinter. If you can barely get off the ground, then you're almost certainly an endurance athlete. When Scott Hamlet was coach here, he had what we call a jump board. If you ask someone to jump straight up and watch their feet and see how far their feet get off the ground, it's tempting to sort of bend in the middle and bend the knees and hips, and you get a false reading. So what you do is you have a jump board. What you do is you extend your arms right up, you have your board up on the wall, extend your arms right up, see where the fingers get to, then ask them to jump straight up and see how high they can touch. That'll give you a more reliable measurement. We used to have a jump board, but in one of the many moves and cleanups and throwouts, people who didn't understand what it was mean that it's gone to the dump. Okay, so jump test, quick, easy, simple, fairly good guide. This next one here would be the one I would do, but it's fairly complex. It consists of acquiring the results of a number of time trials over a range of distances. Now, a general purpose athlete, one of those that's got balanced white to red fibre, for every time they double their distance, you can expect the time taken for that to go up by a factor of 2.2. Sprinters are very explosive over short distances, but they can't maintain that speed. So if you double their distance on them, that time factor will go up by a factor of 2.3, 2.4. At the other end of the scale, those that are all red fibre can't go very fast, even at short distances, but they can maintain that speed for quite a long time. Their factor will be closer to about 2.1. So that's how you can tell the difference. Now, if you do time trials over a range of distances, and you're a general purpose athlete and you go 2.2, 2.3, 2.5, 2.8 as you go from 50 to 100 to 200 to 400, you're not fit. That's an indication they're not fit. That factor, if you're fit, that factor should remain constant every time you double the distance. That'll give it away. It'd take me a good half an hour to describe how to do that. It's most conveniently done on a computer and involves quite a bit of arithmetic. This one here is what nearly everyone does. They put them in short distance races and see who comes first. Well, you might think that'd pick out your sprinter for you. Not very reliably, because there are too many other variables. It depends on how mature they are in terms of their physiology, you know, their muscle development and everything like that. How fit they are, how healthy they are. It's fourth down the list, but it's the one that everyone most common, well, excuse me, not everyone. It's what's most commonly relied on if you don't understand anything about it. So here we are, muscle scan, jump test, time trials over a range of distances, and seeing who comes first. That about muscle composition took a long time, but it is vitally important. And now we move on to this physiology of energy production. It's intimately tied in with what happens during a race and what you are conditioning for. And I've written here, because the biochemical jargon can be a bit overwhelming, I've attempted to represent the processes by pipes. I've got some diagrams coming up here. Generally, the larger diameter of the pipe, the more quickly it can deliver energy, and the longer the pipe, the longer the time it can deliver that energy. And note that the drawings are not to scale. Now, I've written here, energy production is rather like a fire. It requires both fuel and oxygen, and the source of the oxygen is from the air that we breathe. Now the oxygen diffuses across the lung membrane to be absorbed by hemoglobin in the red blood cells in the circulation. There. Now at the muscle tissue, oxygen from hemoglobin in the blood passes to myoglobin in the cells. Now note that this is outrageously oversimplified. I'm trying to make it understandable. Anyone who really does understand this is going to say, oh no, that's not quite right, oh no, there's more to it than that. So this is just an attempt to make it understandable. It's something like this. Now in the cells, the chemical energy from fuel and oxygen produce the mechanical energy from movement. For movement, this is symbolised by the red wheel. That's this one here. That's, if you've heard about ATP, adenosine triphosphate, making myself sound clever there, but that's where all the action ultimately happens. Now, in an emergency, such as at the start of a race, phosphocreatine, which is this represented by this big green, short green pipe here, and myoglobin together can provide a burst of high power for a few seconds. So these are standing by in the muscle waiting for you to have to do something very, very quickly. it'll get you off the block and for your first 3 or 5 strokes, something like that. Now, assuming that exertion continues at maximum, this is not taking race strategy into account, as the phosphocreatine is running out after the first few seconds, glucose becomes the source of fuel, and likewise the oxygen begins to be sourced from hemoglobin in the bloodstream. So you've got about a teaspoon of glucose going around in your bloodstream, and you've got to get that into the cells and recreating the ATP now the amount of this that you've got, everyone has a sprint range, or I should say a sprint duration, of around about 20 odd seconds. Sprinters will deliver it more quickly. Endurance athletes will consume it not quite that quickly. But that's around about the extent of it. Alright, we'll move on. After that, you're running on glycogen as the fuel source, which you have some of in your muscles and a lot stored in the liver. And the oxidizer is the air that you can get across your lung membranes and through your bloodstream into the muscle cells. And that's a much longer path for everything, and so that takes longer again. But you've got quite a lot of this. This can keep you going for an hour or two. That's mostly what you have to take into account. There is more of this. If you have to keep going, then you've got fat reserves, but they're slower again. They can't keep you going for much more than what an equivalent exertion to about heart rate 120 beats per minute. But that can go on for several hours. Just move on. Right, I'll go back. Now, from this, you've got about... that got interrupted there, and I lost my train of thought, so I have to try to remember what I meant to say. I think what I was going to point out was, look, between the phosphocreatine and the glucose here, and the hemoglobin, you've got about 25 seconds maximum. Now, a super fit adult can swim 50 metres on that. They'll finish the race running on oxygen from the hemoglobin that was circulating in their bloodstream while they were still standing on the block. But not so for your 9, 10, 11 year olds. They'll get to about the 30 metre mark here, and then they have to start running on glycogen and air for the other 10 seconds, 20 metres, whatever they've got to go. That is the requirement for conditioning the aerobic system. You can practice your races and you'll improve this, but you won't do much to improve this. That's why, if you want to improve this, that's where you need to do aerobic conditioning. And that's what I'm going to be saying a lot about shortly. During a race, it will be going something like this. Your phosphocreatine myoglobin system can exert power at something like this rate, but only for a few seconds. Here's your, let's just suppose this is your glucose hemoglobin system, not doing much, but once you get going, your phosphocreatine drops off rapidly, and the glucose hemoglobin system will ramp up to compensate. Now, the thing to realise about this is phosphocreatine myoglobin up here, your your glucose hemoglobin system can only deliver energy at not quite that much. I don't know exactly what the figure is, let's say about 80%. Now, and you'll go at that for about 20 odd seconds. So there's your glucose system. Here's your glycogen and air system. It's just resting here, not doing much. But as you start to run out of glucose and hemoglobin, your glycogen air system will ramp up as before to take over. And once again, whereas your glucose system is up here, your glycogen system is about here. Let's just say another 80% or something. So if you go flat out from the start, you can see there are points at which the body changes gears. And it never gets quite up to what it was before. This is where the concept of pacing comes in. Let's just look at this glucose system. If you don't use it at its maximum rate, you can extend it quite a bit further. And that's called pacing. Look, people who race horses, again, know about this. The jockey is not just there to steer the horse around the course. The jockey is there to keep the horse reined in until it's at a predetermined distance out from the finish, where the jockey can let the horse have its head and it can sprint to the finish. So that's the notion behind pacing in swimming races. Is you don't use your glucose system at maximum, you bring it down a bit and you use some of your glycogen system to supplement it so that you can maintain an almost steady pace for a lot longer. People who think all you need to do is just keep practicing your sprints and you'll push your glucose system further, you'll do it to a point, but then you'll hit a wall. You've only got so much glucose in your bloodstream, you've only got so much hemoglobin. And it's not enough for a junior to do a 50-metre swim on. No one in the world can sprint 100 or any more than that. So anyone who comes out with this all the way slogan should be sent back to the start to learn this again. They probably never knew it. By practicing this a lot, and from experience in your races, you will eventually learn how to pace yourself so that you can keep going at a sustainable pace until you are within the range of whatever sprint ability you have left. That might be about 20 metres out from the finish, 15 metres out from the finish, and you can use that to maintain your pace right to the wall. That's the way to do it. But you can't extend your sprint range indefinitely. You just can't. You have to slow that down so that you can, between the two energy sources, you can maintain a sustainable rate. I'll try to explain this aerobic-based conditioning with the use of a chart. First start with a pair of axes where you've got duration of exercise in minutes on the horizontal and heart rate, which is a good measure of exertion, on the vertical axis. And this would have just been a matter of trial and error. They would have tried a range of combinations to find out what worked and what didn't. And there something like that. And what they would have found was that for juniors, heart rates below 150 didn't have much benefit in terms of conditioning effect. And likewise, you have to keep going steadily for 20 minutes at least to have any significant conditioning effect. And so what we end up with is in the top right hand corner there where that A1 ellipse is where you do your aerobic based conditioning. Heart rate's about 150 to 170 for juniors, and duration about 20 to 30 minutes or so. And here's the definition of it. You swim at 3/4 of your maximum heart rate continuously, underlined continuously, for at least 20 minutes. And for age group swimmers, that's 150 to 170 beats per minute. In the last line there, it says where maximum can be approximated by 220 minus your age. So this can be for people of almost any age, practically. Now, don't think you can do this by doing 100 metres at a time and having a rest of 1 minute in between, because you have to keep your heart rate, in this case, above 150. And while you're standing there resting, your heart rate will be coming down at a rate of about 10 beats a minute every 10 seconds. You'll go well below that 150 while you're having a rest, and you won't have satisfied the definition for aerobic based conditioning. You'll get very little benefit. Sounds to me like I've read competition. Anyway, we'll continue on. Just by the way, supposing you want to compete at a swim meet in 1 week from now, and you come to me and you say, can you get us fit? I'll say, we can make a start. But conditioning is a little bit like watching grass grow. With regular training, you can become substantially fit in about 8 weeks. Think about that. That's about as long as we've got in the first half of our season. Then we have Christmas holidays, and then you've got a quick 6 weeks and it's all over. So unless you train right through the Christmas holidays, you're not even going to complete one 12-week program. I've been talking about heart rates. Do not get tricked into buying a batch of heart rate monitors. They're expensive, often unreliable. They take time to use. The swimmers are lined up waiting their turn, and their heart rate is dropping the whole time. They're a menace. You should be able to learn to monitor your own heart rate quickly enough and accurately enough by yourself. When you're working at conditioning sorts of rates, you'll find pulses all over yourself. Your carotid pulse is probably the strongest and easiest one to find. You can use your thumb to take your own heart rate, but not someone else's. You've got a pulse in your thumb. Carotid artery either side of your larynx there. Another one here just below your collarbone, just in from the depression there at the shoulder. You can only just feel it normally, but when you're working you'll have a good pulse there. Another one, the artery here on the inside of your upper arm. You can be exhausted and you can stand there with your arms crossed with your thumb on that one. I've found the disadvantage of it is that it tends to slip around the bone and you lose it. This one here, where the doctor or someone might take it, your radial pulse, whatever it is, that's the polite one. It's not so invasive, but it's probably the hardest one to try to locate when you're in a hurry. Now, you need to be able to do this very quickly. It doesn't have to be spot on in terms of accuracy, but you need to be able to get this within about 10 seconds. So, one way to do it, this you watch the pace clock and learn to watch the hand sweep around through 6 seconds. Count how many pulses you get in that 6 seconds, multiply by 10. So if you get 15 pulses in 6 seconds, that's 150, that's your target range. I find 6 seconds a little bit difficult to locate on the clock. You might find 10 seconds easier. That's as long as you'll want to spend before you have to take off again. But in 10 seconds for aerobic based conditioning, your target will be 25 to 28 pulses in 10 seconds. 25 to 28. The coaching manual describes some 8 different forms of conditioning, and here they are listed in a table. Right up the top is aerobic endurance. Aerobic base, pardon me. The next one down, aerobic endurance, is very similar. The duration is 20 minutes again. This time, whereas for aerobic base the heart rate was 150 to 170 for juniors, aerobic endurance is conducted at heart rates of 170 to 190 for juniors. Whoop, wrong way again. There we are, in the middle. And so they go, this summary table here, there are 8 of them listed, and then in the following pages they're dealt with in detail. Here's aerobic endurance, for example. Some example sets for aerobic endurance, and why I'm showing you this is you'll look at your head and you'll look at this and you'll scratch your head, but after a while you'll realise that these examples, the distances they come up to are quite extraordinary if you're thinking about your junior squad. And you come to realise that a lot about this book is directed towards basically mature swimmers who are preparing for national titles. In the book, your local junior squads do get a mention, but how to adapt this to your juniors, you have to probably work that out for yourself. Another one of these key concepts, specificity. Look, if you approach your training by just practicing your races, the trouble with that is you can only do a few of those in a session before exhaustion sets in. There's a good chance you'll still be suffering from the after effects of it when you come to do your next session. So how can we do more work that is more effective? And this is where this specificity comes in. Let's just take an example of something relatively simple. Say you're targeting the 50 metres freestyle event. Well, you might start by doing a few 50s with paddles and a pull buoy. What that'll do is that'll build strength in the arms and shoulders. Might do a number of 15 metre sprints with walk back recovery or something like that. That will get the muscles used to faster than race pace action and more rapid energy supply than you'll be using for most of your race. You might practice breathing, for example, every 5 strokes. That's just a number I pulled out of the air. You see, when you were taught to swim, you're taught that you had a bubble arm and a breathing arm, bubble arm, breathing arm. You stay in that habit. Using that in a short distance race is unnecessary. You see, it takes a considerable amount of time and energy to take a breath. And in a short distance race, you don't need to breathe that often. A super fit adult sprinter who can sprint 50 metres will breathe once at halfway. That's just to expel the carbon dioxide so that a big slug of stale blood doesn't hit their brain as they're trying to climb out of the pool. 9, 10, 11-year-olds, you've got about a 30 metre sprint. So you're going to need some oxygen from air, maybe not that much. This is where in a 50 metre race you could breathe every 5th stroke, or maybe even less. See, try to find out what works for you. But practice it in training. Here's another one. Look, you could do some 75-metre swims. That's what we call over distance, because it's no use standing up there on the block knowing that you've got just enough fuel, more or less, to get to the end. Having an off day, you could run out 5 metres short of the finish, and you don't want that. So you need to know there's more than you need. There's something else you can do while you're doing over distances. You can break that into intervals. Like I said before, you can't practice your race repeatedly, but what you can do is you can break it up into segments and do just one segment at race pace. So what you can do is you might, one will be 75 metres where you do the rest of it easy, and then the final 25 at race pace. The second one, you'll do your race pace in the middle 25, and the third one, you'll go at race pace in the first 25 and do the rest easy. The sports, they call it interval training. In swimming, I've heard it referred to as variable pace. Another one you might do is what they call a descending set. You might do 50 metres in 50 seconds, 50 in 45, another one on 40, another one on 38. You don't get down to your race time, but those are pointing towards it. Of course, routinely you should be doing your aerobic base and an occasional aerobic endurance set. Remember that your 9, 10, 11-year-olds have only got about a 30-metre sprint. What are they going to do for the other 20 metres? This is where you need your sustainable pace, and that's where those conditioning sets supply the fitness to do those well. So why am I rambling on about this? You see, all these things, you haven't done a 50 metres freestyle race yet, but they're all pointing towards it. The strengthening, the speeding up, the over distance, the interval training, the aerobic conditioning, it's all pointing towards doing a good 50 metre freestyle race. We didn't do one yet, but it does work. Now, this fourth key concept, periodisation. This is the one I find daunting because I'm not that good at it. This segment should be at least as large as the one on conditioning. But I'll try to convey something of what it's about. Now, I can illustrate it a bit by describing some of the ways we go the wrong way about it. One of the wrong ways we go about it might be someone's been winning some gold medals at some of the local swim meets and they say, hey, we could be good enough to go to the state titles. And it's only 6 weeks away. Oh dear. It's very likely you're going to be outclassed. 6 weeks is nowhere near long enough. If you want to target the state titles, you need something like a 2-year-long plan leading up to it. Another way we go wrong is some average or a little bit better than average swimmer gets to about age 14 and an ambitious coach gets the swimmer and their parents into a conference with just a few of them together and says, now, if you work really hard this season, you could get to the state titles. Well, you might. You'll probably run 75th out of 80. For the rest of your life you could say you swam at the state titles. But what else does it do? Look, this sort of situation has got more to do with the coach's ambition than it has to do with what the parents want or what the swimmer wants. If you've got a 14-year-old who is still swimming and who hasn't done anything like this before, you want to just be thankful that they are still swimming. you don't want to hit them with the biggest workload they've encountered in their life so far and put them right off. One might be something like if a local club has been winning the point score or around the local district at the local swim meets, and they get all for themselves and they say, let's take the regional championships by storm, and you take a huge team there, well, the chances are that quite a number of them will be outclassed. They'll end up swimming harder than they have in their lives before, just to try to avoid coming last in the slow heat. But I suppose the thing that saves them there is there'll be a lot of other swimmers swimming harder than they have in their lives before, just to avoid coming last in the slow heat. But it does pay to do your homework. So there are some things not to do. Look, if you're one of these who decides in one season to go to the state titles suddenly, what you're going to find there is most of the swimmers have been being groomed for this since the time they were about 6. You're not going to make an impression on them. And this points to what this periodisation is about. You need to have a plan. And your plan shouldn't be any shorter than about 2 years. And this planning refers to everything from your long-term goals all the way down to where the coach designs a single session and everything in between. Why do they call it periodisation? Well, I guess it's because all these things go in cycles. I mentioned a 2-year plan there before. I don't think I mentioned, look, if whatever you target, whatever swim meet you target as one of your major goals, you count back 12 weeks. 12 weeks, and that's where you start. You can see that there's going to be a number of 12-week cycles in a 2-year campaign. You'll have times off in between them. Each of those 12-week cycles should be in preparation for a major goal. And what you achieve in those goals should be on target for what you want that leads to the end of your 2-year campaign. So you can see it's a long-term thing. Let's get back to those 12-week programs. It doesn't matter what your aptitude is. The first few weeks are going to consist of laying the foundation, and that's going to entail a whole lot of aerobic conditioning predominantly. That's why I keep harping on about that. After that, you start to get more specific to whatever kind of event you are targeting, and while still building up the volume, you'll also be concentrating more and more on skills. And as you get towards the end of those 12 weeks, you will trim the volume down until it looks more like the kind of event that you're targeting. You'll keep developing your skills, and the final 3 weeks or so are this mysterious and dreaded taper. That's where the volume drops off noticeably, and the quality gets sharper and sharper. It's a strange, mysterious thing, this taper. Without being able to explain why it does it, kind of a rebound effect causes you to do your best possible performance in competition at that time. Just ramble a little bit more trying to fill out this picture about periodisation. Another example where you program some component of your training with increasing loads a week at a time. You might increase your load week 1, week 2 a bit higher, week 3 a bit higher. Week 4, you might reduce it right down again, and that's to allow for recovery and adaptation. And then you'll go through the cycle again. That's another little example, I gather, of what they call periodisation. I can't think of much else off the top of my head. So getting back to the reason why I'm doing this, wherever you happen to be, you may or may not have a proficient, accredited coach training your local squad. Even if they do have their accreditation, many of them, even right at the start, the information I've been trying to convey here went over their heads and they fell back on just applying recipes. So they might not be able to inform you about this. I don't inquire and I haven't been looking over anyone's shoulder, but I gather from what I'm seeing in competition is, one is that a lot of swimmers have not had their aptitude properly identified, and what's more obvious is most of the swimmers are not fit, which indicates to me very likely that the coaches don't know how to get them fit. Which leads me to think, as I said before, that the local coaches are either not properly accredited or didn't really understand right from the start what this is all about. And what's adding to that now in the last couple of decades, I can remember back to times when if you were an ambitious coach and wanted to be the successful coach of a competitive squad, you had to get the lease on a pool. So your club squad knew that at least the coach was accredited. Quality was extremely variable, but at least they were coaches first and pool managers second. Even right back then, no one was ever going to make a living from coaching club squads, not in local towns like around here. They made up their income by doing learn to swim lessons and stroke correction lessons and selling red frogs in the canteen. Now it's all changed. We've got aquatic centres being leased by for-profit businesses, and they're really only interested in what's going to make a profit. Now remember, I said a coach is never going to make a living coaching the club squad. So one of these for-profit businesses is going to lose money employing a coach. They can't pay them an hourly rate that's affordable by the parents of the club swimmers. So unless they can find someone to do that, who can also do the learn to swim lessons and operate the pool plant and sell red frogs and cut the grass and put the bins out so that they've got a full day's work, then it can't really be done. And what are they going to do for a living in the off-season? So this is where we've got ourselves in a situation where the ones who are training the club squads are more likely to be part-timers of some sort. And it's even harder, it would be even harder, to expect them to have jumped through all the hoops to get a coaching accreditation. So all these things are working against having a fully accredited, fully proficient coach in every local swim club. That's just how it has come about. So as a technique development teacher, the requirement for you to do time observing a coach training a competitive squad is not going to be very helpful to you. Like I said at the start, you will see where some of your swimmers are destined to go, but the coach is probably working from some sort of repetitive recipe that they got from some other coach, or more likely what they remember their coach getting them to do. Even if they can do that, they won't understand why the coach was doing that. Why is that important? This is extra important because of one thing. 1976. What happened in 1976? Australia came back from Montreal, Canada, with no gold medals in any sport. No gold, any sport. What had gone wrong? Especially for a sporting mad country like Australia. Well, nothing had gone wrong. They investigated all this, nothing had gone wrong. What had happened was sports training had become highly technical. The rest of the world had caught up to us and overtaken us. So we had to catch up. What I've been telling you about in this is the sorts of things that resulted from that. Before 1976, pretty much all you did was you learnt to swim and then you practiced your races. Better coaches would have known something about the difference between ordinary technique and quality technique. They all had their own theories. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. They found that out by trial and error. I want to know about all the origin of all this highly technical stuff I've been trying to convey to you. It's the result of what happened in 1976. And what happens with what we've got now, with people training squads that don't have coaches accreditation and just keep going back to doing what their coach got them to do, does is keep turning the clock back to before 1976. The big metropolitan clubs and the big private school clubs that do have good quality coaches need not be worried that there are going to be any upstarts from the bush while we just keep circling around like this.